So the Switch 2 just came out last week, and a lot of people are wondering if they should pick up one of these or if they should go for something more like this guy. This is the Steam Deck OLED. I'm not a big fan of the comparison between the two because at the end of the day, this is meant to be a PC handheld gaming device, whereas this is a hybrid home and handheld console. But there are a lot of people who are trying to pick between the two, so I thought I would just give my 2 cents on it. It's actually a really easy decision when you think about it, just based on what kind of games you play, really. Like if you already have a ton of games in your Steam library and you just want to play them in a handheld form factor, then maybe the Steam Deck is your best option. But if you like Nintendo games and you just want to play the newest ones as they come out, then maybe the Switch 2 is the best bet for you. If you don't really have a bias either way though, and you're just looking for a way to get into the handheld gaming space, then that's when the comparison gets a lot more interesting. The Steam Deck OLED, which comes in at around $550 for the 512 gigabyte model, comes with, the Steam Deck itself, a really nice carrying case, and the AC adapter. This is the first category where you can really see that this is just meant to be a handheld device, because comparing to the Switch 2, which comes in at around $450 for the non-bundle variant, that comes with the Switch 2 console tablet, the Joy-Con 2 controllers, the Joy-Con 2 wrist straps, you've got the Joy-Con 2 controller grip, the Switch 2 dock, an HDMI cable for connecting to your TV, and the AC adapter, brick and cable. So for $100 less, it really does seem like you get more for the Switch 2, but it really just depends on where your priorities are. In terms of design, the Switch 2 is very sleek and minimal. I would say almost friendlier. Whereas I would say the Steam Deck is a little more gamery in comparison in terms of aesthetic. It's definitely a lot bulkier, definitely quite a bit heavier. But, with that extra bulk comes a more comfortable grip for longer handheld sessions. But if you don't really care about the design or anything like that, and you just want to know what is inside of these things, how they stack up in terms of specs, well, the Steam Deck comes with a custom AMD processor. The CPU is based on Zen 2. It's got 4 cores and 8 threads and boosts up to 3.5 gigahertz. Its GPU is based on RDNA 2 and can boost up to 1.6 gigahertz. It's got 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5. This one I have here comes with 512 gigabytes of storage, but it can go up to 1 terabyte if you pay a little extra. And the screen is 1280 by 800. It's an OLED panel and it's got a max refresh rate of 90 Hertz. Taking it over to the Switch 2, it's got a custom chip from NVIDIA. The CPU is an ARM Cortex A78C, which can boost up to 1.7 gigahertz, with a base clock of 998 megahertz docked and 1.1 gigahertz in mobile mode. The GPU is based on NVIDIA's Ampere architecture, and it can boost up to 1.4 gigahertz, with a base clock of around 1 gigahertz docked and 561 megahertz mobile. For memory, the Switch 2 comes with 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5 and 256 gigabytes of internal storage. I will say that both the Switch 2 and the Steam Deck have expandable memory if you use an SD card, but the Switch 2 is only compatible with microSD express cards. If battery is something you're concerned about, the Steam Deck OLED is sporting a 50 watt-hour battery, which is rated for 3 to 12 hours of gameplay, depending on how demanding the title is. While the Switch 2 has a 5,220 milliamp hour battery and should land you around 2 to 6 hours depending on the game, the Steam Deck is running SteamOS, which is based on Linux, and it's a very streamlined, straightforward PC gaming OS. You've got all your games right up front, and if you just press your menu button, you've got a ton of options for your media, your friends list. I will say SteamOS has a lot more customization aspects to it than with the Nintendo Switch OS. Mostly just in terms of, being able to manually set the clock speeds of the GPU and whatnot. You can set a max refresh rate. So if that's really important to you, then I think the Steam Deck wins in that regard. SteamOS also has a desktop mode, which is pretty cool, but unless you have a keyboard and mouse to plug into a third-party dock, I don't really see myself using it that much, but it is there if you want it. The Switch 2 is running a new version of Nintendo's custom OS. It's a very simple, bare bones operating system. You've got all your games right up front. You've got a few menu options at the bottom, like you've got your Switch Online utility if you have a Nintendo Switch Online subscription. You've got game chat if that's something you want to use. You've got your news section. You've got your album with all of your screenshots. And then you've just got like your utility for pairing controllers. You've got your virtual game card menu, and you've got your system settings. It's worth noting that on the Steam Deck, if you do have a third-party dock, I have this one from Anker, you are actually able to use a USB mouse and keyboard with it, and I believe you're also able to use Bluetooth. Similarly, on the Switch 2, you can use a USB keyboard with the dock, and in terms of a mouse, you can just pop off one of the Joy-Con 2 controllers and use it in mouse mode. But in terms of controls, the Steam Deck has full-size joysticks and face buttons, as well as deep triggers on the back, and you also get 4 programmable buttons. On the Switch 2, they've erred more on the side of simplicity. You know, they've got tight, snappy joysticks and clicky face buttons and triggers, and you get nothing in the way of extra buttons on the back. So checking out handheld gameplay, I'm using No Man's Sky as a reference. The Switch 2 version of No Man's Sky is targeting 1080p at 40 FPS, and it seems to hit it with no problem. You've got good detail on the player character and the environments. I will say though that the pop-in for stuff like the foliage is pretty noticeable, but it's like that on both systems, so it doesn't really impact our comparison here. On the Steam Deck, at 800p on the standard preset, we are sitting around, mid to high 40s, low 50s in terms of a frame rate, but bumping it up to 1080p to match the Switch 2, we start to see it dip down into the high 30s and low 40s, so very similar performance there. Looking at docked gameplay, the Switch 2 is targeting 1440p at 30 FPS, and it seems to be hitting it no problem again. The detail looks great on the character model, the wildlife, the environments, the foliage. We still have that pop-in with the foliage and not a very big draw distance, but again, that's the same on both systems in this case. Generally no issues with the Switch 2, even in a denser environment like this one. And in a similar situation, on the Steam Deck, we are targeting 1440p, and we are on the standard preset with FSR2 performance turned on. We seem to be hovering around the mid-20s in terms of FPS, so definitely not the best, and this is another case where you can really see that the Steam Deck is meant to be a handheld console, while the Switch 2 is going for more of that hybrid home and handheld experience. So in terms of performance, they're pretty similar, although the Switch 2 does perform better in docked mode, and that's just because the Steam Deck doesn't have those different clock speeds depending on whether it's in docked or handheld mode. And again, I would say the decision really comes down to what kind of games do you play. If you're a PC gamer, again, maybe the Steam Deck is your best bet. If you like Nintendo games or you're not really picky about what games you want to play, I would say the Switch 2 is probably the better buy in terms of performance and included value. But yeah, the decision is ultimately up to you. Either way, you're getting a pretty sweet piece of tech.